Anyway, we're going through kind of as we lead up to Easter, we're going through some signs in the book of John, and so we're calling it 7 signs. And it says this kind of to jump ahead. John 20 says, starting verse 30, says, "Many other signs, therefore, Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing in him, you may have life in his name." And Jesus did a lot of things. And he did a lot of miracles, a lot of signs. Couldn't even write them all down. But the signs that we see in the book of John, and we see 7 leading up to Easter, reveal who he is, and it's so that you may have life in his name. We have this new life. When we understand who Jesus is, and we give our life to following him, it gives us this new life. And so in John chapter 4, we're going to jump ahead. Now, I know we just finished the Matthew challenge, where I challenged you to kind of to read Matthew, but if you want to kind of jump, again, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 stories of the gospel, the stories of Jesus' life are in there in the Bible, first 4 books of the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, kind of similar. They call them the synoptics because they're telling similar stories, they're kind of different angles and things. And I love each of them for who they are. Matthew is really a lot about this is, he shows a lot of fulfillment with the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Mark is very they think it may have been written to the Romans because it's so straightforward. It's I call it the ADD gospel. There's no details. He just stays on focus. And then Luke is great because Luke just kind of brings out how the Spirit's doing things. I love that. But John is, again, he's one of these kids is doing their own thing. John kind of takes this different look at things, and it was, and I love it. So, even though you just read Matthew, you might kind of settle in and read John. And when it says, you might be able to figure out where we're going next to kind of give context to some of these things. And so we're only in chapter 4. You don't even have to read a chapter every day, like with the Matthew challenge. There you go. And so, you can text me if you want to know where we're going next. But John, he got me on the Matthew challenge. John chapter 4, starting in verse 43 says, "At the end of 2 days, Jesus went on to Galilee. He himself had said that a prophet is not honored in his hometown, yet the Galileans welcomed him, for they had been in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration and had seen everything he did there." Now, it's kind of like, a prophet is not honored in his hometown. And I struggle with this scripture because I'm from here. Literally, at one point, I think my mom lived across the street. My dad's from Camden. My mom's from Wyoming. It's like Romeo and Juliet that they got together, If those of you know the history of the 2 towns. But it's, I'm from here. And it was weird starting a church in your hometown because I remember this verse and I'm going, oh no, are people going to, can you do that? And it was funny because this guy came up to me one time at a church and he's like, it's, it says a prophet's not honored in his hometown, but you really have that in your hometown anyway. I was like, whew, that's good, because he didn't know I was thinking about planting a church. And it's kind of like if, some of us, if you knew the president as a kid, well, that you'd be really old at this point because our president's older. But, if you knew the president as a kid, it's hard to kind of sometimes maybe see them as a president, right? Because you've seen them pick boogers and, all those things that kids do. If you've changed someone's diapers, it would then be hard to see them as the president. And, if you they say familiarity breeds contempt. Sometimes just knowing people. And so even though, Jesus kind of grew up in this town, and I wonder if sometimes it's a little bit of jealousy too. Because, who does this guy think he is? He was just, and because if you look at Jesus' life, he led a very normal life. Now, we have miraculous birth. And we did that for the Christmas season. We talked about, kind of all kinds of cool, miraculous things for Jesus being born. And then, we don't see anything in the Gospels till he's 12. He shows up, his parents lose him in Jerusalem, which is a funny story because, you want to talk about pressure? You just lost Jesus, the Son of God, in Jerusalem. They left. It went a day. Now, who here's left their kids somewhere? I've left my kids. Okay, no, I'm the only one that's going to admit it here. My kids are too old. You can't call child protection services on me. But, there's times you leave your kids somewhere. You leave a party. You didn't realize they were still there. You get back. You leave them at the grocery store. I'm just saying it can happen. None of us, because you guys are all perfect. But, they left this Son of God. They left Jesus in Jerusalem, went a day away. But they found him, and he's, teaching and hanging out with the scholars in the temple and all that. And so, but you really don't see anything then until he's 30. It's funny, if you like, there's all kinds of literature that's written about the time, Jesus, like kind of later, people try to fill in the blanks because there's nothing for Jesus, and they tell crazy stories. But really, there's nothing that happens. He leads a normal life, and that's the point. Because, Hebrews, I'm going to bring Hebrews back in because, we just finished, well, we didn't finish Hebrews. We took a pause in Hebrews. It's a book of the Bible that says men should make the coffee. Hebrews. Okay, for those of you who hadn't heard that joke. It says, so then since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let's hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of gracious God. There we will receive mercy and will find grace to help us when we need it most. Jesus he kind of lived that normal life, and that he understands the temptations, the pressures, and the things we have. Now, it's not all the same stuff. Like, he didn't have to worry about, should I text during church? Like, some of you are struggling with that right now. You're like, should I text during church? Or you can just say you're looking at your Bible. I'll believe you. No, I'm kidding. She is, though. But, it's there's not the same things, but you may not have the same physical thing of, like, do I text the church? But, am I distracted during this? And so Jesus didn't go through the exact same situation, but the same kinds of temptations, right? And that's, and so for 30 years, he just kind of lives a normal life. And so sometimes maybe the people in his hometown are just like, what's this dude? He's just a carpenter. He's just a guy who builds houses, and now he's going around teaching. What's this guy think he is? I don't know, Son of God. But so that's kind of how I picture it. So John chapter 4, sort of verse 46. As he traveled through Galilee, he came to Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. And we talked about that last week. Maybe people hear that, hey, Jesus, he took these big stone jars and made tons and tons, maybe 800 or 900 bottles worth of wine. And so people kind of heard about this kind of thing. And so he came to Cana, where he turned the water into wine. There was a government official in nearby Capernaum whose son was very sick. And when he heard Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son, who was about to die. And this government official comes. Now, there's this tension with Jesus and the government, right? Because he's kind of doing these messianic things. Jesus Christ, we call him Jesus Christ. It's not a name, but it's a title. It's the Greek version of the Hebrew Messiah. He was the anointed one to come. And so Jesus is coming. He's doing some things. And there begins to be this tension between the government and Jesus. So here's this official who sees and hears what Jesus is doing, and he kind of comes over to check him out. And it was a little bit of a risk, because the guy probably worked for Herod. And it would be like if you worked for the Democratic Party and went to go to a Republican official for a favor. I was trying to think of like modern things, but in a time period where the king had a lot more authority and power. Now, I don't like to get political here. We blame the president for things, which side of the party, for things that sometimes they have no authority over. They had a lot more authority in those days. It would be like, I don't like you, you dead. Ours generally can't do that, although I know there's conspiracy theories. We're going to stay away from that. But, he'd heard this stuff. He comes to Jesus, and it says his son is sick, and he comes, and Jesus says, he comes, and he says, will you never believe me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders? And now, it's kind of, when we read that, who do we think he's addressing? No one wants to answer. They're like, I might have it wrong, and Jeff's going to tell me I'm wrong. No, but it's kind of, it sounds singular in there, and that's the problem with English is we don't have a y'all. And so if you, the you is plural in Greek, which is the original language of the New Testament here. And so the New Southern Delaware version would be, will y'all never believe me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders? Not just the one guy, but everybody. Or the Pittsburgh version, I was going to give a shout out for those Pittsburghers. Will yins never believe me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders? Some of you get it. If you Pittsburghers, yes. All y'all. The New Texas version, will all y'all never believe. I know there's a whole bunch of Southern, like, you versions. Hey, it's you version. Anyway. And so it's sort of this sort of a matter-of-fact statement. Now, Some of you saw some of the pictures I posted on Facebook. We were traveling a little bit this week. We did a college visit out in the Midwest, and it's very interesting because we stopped at Chick-fil-A when we got back because it's not open today. We figured that was our opportunity, and we'd been flying all day, and I didn't want to pay $80 for a chicken sandwich at an airport, which they're not really that high, but it feels like it. It's like you're getting a bottle of water. You're like, that's $4 for a Gatorade. Wow. Anyway, it sounds like the temple stuff, right, that we talk about. But, you go to Chick-fil-A, and what do they say when you pull up to the drive-thru or everything? They're like, how may I help you, or something like that. I don't know exactly what they say. And that's kind of what I was expecting. We went to a particular fast food chain, and Josh and I just started laughing because I pull up the window, though, and he's like, yo, what chicken you want? And I'm like, this is a national chain. Well, it's a regional chain. And I'm like, I did not expect to be greeted by yo and what chicken you want. But it was funny because that's all they had on I didn't realize, and some of you know, Raising Cane's, some of you know this. It's like all they sell is chicken fingers. It's got a really kind of cool story about the guy doing it. And so, I was like, I'd like a burger. No. I laughed because, they know why you're there. You want something. And they don't pretend to be nice to you. They're just like, yo, what chicken you want? And we were just cracking up. We were like recording stuff, sending it to Denise while we were in the car there. And that's kind of, I kind of picture that for Jesus here. He's like, yo, what miracle you want? Because, hey, I'm doing all this stuff. And he knows that some people are really just there for the show, right? You go, they're kind of hanging around Jesus because he's doing some cool things, and they have some misunderstandings about what he wants. And so he's like, yo, what miracle you want? Is that what you're looking for here? And it's funny because, why wouldn't people want to see signs to believe, right? Like if you were to say, I'm a superhero, if you were to say that, what would I want to see? I want to see you fly. I want to see laser eyes or something. If you just tell me you're a superhero, okay, show me some proof, right? Or like those of us who are gym rats, I have kids all the time. They're like, I squat 700 pounds. Oh, really? Let me see it. Do you hit parallel? And I'll load the weight for you. But some of you are power lifters, get it. But you want proof, right? If somebody's saying stuff, and in life, sometimes we want things for selfish reasons too, right? I went through Chicago O'Hare, and I don't think I'd ever seen this before, and I had to stop in my tracks and take a picture. I posted on Facebook, for those of you who follow me on Facebook, a Lego vending machine. I know. Go on, see it. I'm sure it's people on long international flights stuck in O'Hare. I know they're like, okay, $80 is worth a peace of mind that I don't have to talk to my kid for the next couple hours. But I'm thinking all these pieces, and you're going to lose them in Chicago O'Hare, or you're going to try to build them on a plane. I just think but I went in, and I could not help. I wanted a large, Lego Chuck Taylor, or whatever it was, and a Vader head, Darth Vader. I wanted it, but I wanted it for selfish reasons, right? I mean. Sometimes we have kids just so we can get Legos and stuff and play with them still. That's one of the advantages. I just want it for selfish reasons. I'm not going to stand there and say, God, give me a sign, a Vader Lego head would be that sign, because I would just want stuff. And that's kind of sometimes when people came to Jesus for miracles, they kind of wanted stuff because often signs won't satisfy us anyway, because you kind of have your mind made up one way or another. Often signs won't satisfy, okay, I try to stay out of certain issues, but if some of you believe this, you're just wrong. The flat earth people, I'm sorry. Some of you were like, I'm really a flat earther. I really don't care. But, it's funny because if you're a flat earther, and there's people who literally believe the world is flat, like we're living, I don't know, it's just, and it doesn't matter what evidence you throw at them, they're not going to believe. They'll explain all kinds of things. Well, it's actually, and it doesn't matter what math you throw at them. It doesn't matter what facts you throw. They're just, no amount of proof will work. If you believe the earth is flat, it's often not rational, but you'll believe it anyway. And a lot of people come to Jesus. They already had their preconceptions about what to believe about him. And it didn't matter what sign he was going to give them. They weren't going to believe it anyway, right? And a lot of them just hang out because he does cool stuff and they want to get free things. And so, he seems to be testing the fish a little with this question. But And as he tests the official says this, the official pleaded, "Lord, please come now before my little boy dies." Now imagine the desperation. We kind of see probably where the story's heading, because if you've read the Gospels enough, you know Jesus does some cool stuff. He heals people, yada, yada, yada. But imagine for a moment, those of you who have kids, picture yourself, your little kid. I don't know how old the kid is, but like picture him sick. And there's nothing worse when your kid is sick, right? I remember like, man, my kids were sick, and it's like I never understood what my parents must have gone through when I was sick, but it's like you just, like your heart's like, there's anything, you would trade places with them in an instant, right? Because they're sick. And imagine in this society, they don't have the advanced medical stuff we do. So they're sick, and often sickness leads to death when you don't have medications and all kinds of things. And so you picture that. Josh is no baby now. It's funny because we were flying, and the Lord provided. I got really cheap plane tickets. It was cheaper for us to fly there than to drive there, which was our original plan. So I'm glad, because we would have just driven up this morning and preached, and who knows what you'd get if I just preached after getting out of the car. But we're flying, and the flight attendant comes up, and they invited me to move because, of course, we get. Josh and I walk onto a plane. We got the worst seats because we got last minute really good fares. And we go to the back to sit against the one seat that won't recline. And we got a big dude sitting there already. I mean, it's like, and so we're all like sitting sideways, like this is going to be a very, very long flight. And the stewardess, she comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, a flight attendant, I know that they've changed the names. I try to keep these things in my mind. But she's like, hey, would you like to change seats? I got one up here." And I'm like, "Well, I know he doesn't look like a little boy, but he's still my little boy. I know he's as big as me now." But it's like, there's something, I don't want to leave my son. He looks big, but he's like his first, flight as technically an adult. Sorry, buddy, you're still my little boy. But, he's big, and it's still hard, even as a big boy now. And some of you have followed the saga with his ear that exploded during wrestling season and everything. Blood everywhere, had to stop match and everything. It was awesome. You should see his ear now. But it's getting better. But it was like, it's so hard to watch, like when your kid's in pain, right? Like, man, I was so stressed during the wrestling tournament because it was like he's going through all this pain and all this stuff, right? And when your kid is sick, you're going through it. So this guy comes to Jesus in desperation. He didn't care about whether Herod finds out, I'm sure. He's just like, I don't care. I want my son to live. I want to be okay. There's this helplessness. He's probably exhausted all other options. He was an official, so he probably had access to what health care they had, and that wasn't working out. And so he's desperate. And then Jesus tells him, "Go back home, your son will live." And the man believed what Jesus said and started home. And so he had to go, it was probably a day's walk. It was like about 20 miles. I know, I'm the kind of guy who gets out the maps and tries to figure out how far it is between towns, and they measure things by the old roads between things, and how far the crow flies. I'm that nerdy guy sometimes trying to figure, it'd be about 20 miles. It would be like walking from here to Milford. I mean, it's not like today, we jump in a car, we go all kinds of places. You don't even think anything, although you might with the price of gas right now, but you're not thinking 20 miles is a big deal. It's a commitment. I mean, some of you don't want to walk next door. In California, there's this funny movie, the guy gets out and he gets in the car and drives next door. And if you ever lived in California, it's hilarious because in California, anyone who lives in Southern California, you can testify, they don't drive, they don't go anywhere. I remember one time, I was like, I went to school out there, and the guy's like, "Hey, you want to drive or you want me to drive?" I'm like, "Drive?" It's like it's like a couple hundred yards. And so we got in the car and drove, and it took longer to find a parking place when we got there than it would have taken to driven. That's California. And so it's kind of, and a lot of us don't want to, but this is a long walk, the guy. It's a 20-miler. Who here's walked 20 miles this week? You're like, total, not today. Some of you run 20 miles, but most of us don't. It's a big walk. It says, while the man was on his way home, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. And he asked them when the boy had begun to get better, and they replied, "Yesterday afternoon at 1:00, his fever suddenly disappeared." Then the father realized that this was the very time Jesus had told him, your son will live. And he and his entire household believed in Jesus. This was the second miraculous sign Jesus did in Galilee after coming from Judea. And so why this sign? And again, it would be fun for you if you want to, as we're going through the book of John, and I can tell you where we're going to land on the next sign, although you may be able to figure it out on your own. If you go through some of the stories, kind of back in John 1:4, Jesus said, it's called the prologue of John. It's sort of an introduction to John's gospel, and it has some deep things in there. It says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And, if you read the story right before kind of John chapter 3, there's a guy, I call him Nick at night because it's Nicodemus. He comes to Jesus at night. Another guy who's sort of afraid of the religious authorities because he's like kind of in the in crowd there, but he sees Jesus doing some stuff and he's like, he's kind of coming to Jesus. And Jesus talks to him about, hey, I've come to bring new life. You must be born again. It's a spiritual act that brings you into the kingdom. And so he has this conversation with Nicodemus. You can read that in chapter 3. And that's why we get born again Christians sometimes people talk about. I remember I grew up in the 80s, and it's like people were like born again Christians. They were like the crazy Christians. But really, you have to be born again to be a Christian, right? I didn't understand that growing up, but it's like there's this spiritual rebirth. The Spirit awakens you inside. And then there's the woman at the well in John chapter 4. We've talked about this story in the past. I can't remember the last time we did. But, this woman she's hanging out at the well. The disciples go to get some, food and stuff for Jesus. Jesus is like, the woman comes. He's like, hey, I got this living water, and there's this conversation that ensues, and he's, hey, you Samaritans are a little off by what you believe, but, hey, I'm the real life, and I'll give you living water. And Jesus said, anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I will give them will be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. And so Jesus, he's about coming to give life. And that's the sign points ultimately to Jesus, who is the one who gives life. He gives life to us. And now he heals the son, but as we talked about, the death rate hovers around 100%, right? I know some of us are uncomfortable with death. You pulled out a couple examples of people who are pulled from earth into heaven and everything. And there's Jesus, he died and he came back again. So, pretty much all the rest of us, if you're born, you live, you die. But God heals, but it points to this thing that's so much bigger. Nicodemus, going back to that story, he's a guy who looks like he has it right? He's the religious guy. He's got all the things. He's got the Christian t-shirts from youth group. He's doing the thing. He's got his kids have the Noah's Ark, little bath toys. And those were so cute. I loved having those with kids. I love the kids' toys. I could work in the nursery all day. There's shout out to the nursery folks. But in our culture, there's many who esteem Jesus, look up to him. But sometimes we don't really want to follow him. And that's kind of where Nicodemus was. He kind of had the rules done right, but he was kind of still, and he was drawn to Jesus, but he'd still, at that point, was kind of missing some things. He was doing the religious thing right, but missed Jesus. And in church, one of the dangers is we can be real good at doing the religious stuff, but really miss who Jesus is and the life that he brings. And the Samaritan woman, I always find her interesting. I was reading some stuff on a plane because I was stuck on a plane. And so I was reading some things. There's different theories, and there's all kinds of cool things in that story, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future again. But part of that whole story is, the Samaritan woman, she's far from God. Now, we think Samaritan, we think, what? Good Samaritan, right? You've heard that term before. I think there's even a club or something, maybe, do they still have that? Anyone know? Anyway, but you think of Good Samaritan as someone who does good, because Jesus tells a story, but and about the Good Samaritan, which we won't get into now. But basically, those days, the Samaritans sort of took the faith that God gave them when they came out of the Exodus, kind of mixed it with some other things. They were a little off and different. And so the Jewish people and the Samaritans kind of didn't get along, right? It would be like CR versus Dover, because we've got some Dover folks here too. Some of you don't get it, but if you're local, it's like the two school districts fight. There used to be a football game between the two. They've had to shut it down for years because the fights got so bad. Now, we don't care anymore because now it's like the CR kids all fight over whether they're at the Pfeiffer or Postawade. And now there's Magnolia Middle School, so we don't know if it's going to, a three-way fight. I don't know how we're going to do this. CR keeps growing and growing, or think of, Wyoming versus Camden, whatever your division is, there's, and Wyoming and Camden fight until Dover gets involved and they both fight against Dover. I don't know. It's like siblings or something. Anyway, the Samaritans had kind of gotten a little astray. And a lot of the Jewish people would think they're kind of beyond hope. People would avoid going in there if they could, avoid contact with them because they wanted to be like good religious people. But hey, here's the thing about Jesus. Jesus goes and he reaches out to the Samaritans, right? Because Jesus reaches out to those who are far away. Again, he gives them life. God pursues them. And ultimately, God pursues us. I mean, that's the good news of the gospel. I mean, there were times where I kind of was asking questions about God. That was good. But there were a lot of times where I was running in the other direction, right? But God pursues us. God reaches out to us. God wants this relationship with us. And, religion is, somehow we think religion is kind of like somehow we can reach God if we're good enough. Right? Anyone grow up in a tradition where you kind of have to be good enough? It's like you kind of, I like some of I don't think we set out like that, but it becomes, if I follow all these rules, God will like me, right? And then if you've ever tried to follow all the religious rules people make up, you can't do it. I was talking to someone recently, and they're bound in a different faith, and it's like there's just this pressure to have everything right. Man, that's hard. Because deep inside, I screw up sometimes, right? And I'm sure I'm the only one who struggles with that. But the rest of you might know someone who sins too. But it's not about can I be religious enough and can I get it all right? Now, once God comes and saves us, makes his home in us, the Holy Spirit cleans us, makes us up a little better. He'll make us holy. He'll make us more like him. But it's not based on how good I am, because I ultimately cannot be good enough, right? Because I got sin. I get mad when people, cut me off on the way to the baggage carousel. I mean, you want to have a sin. People in the airport, I think you see the basis instincts. Man, people will fight you to get off the plane. I'm like, we're all going to baggage claim. And then they will fight to get on the plane with their giant suitcases that are way too big to fit in the carry-on. I'm like, seriously, did you even check the little carry-on thing on the way on the, anyone ever say, I'll pay the extra money to send my bag out there so I don't have to worry about it. $30 is worth it for me to not fight people in the airport over that, because I'll win too. But I'm going to sin. But But religion is kind of like, hey, can I make myself good enough? But Christianity is in our brokenness, Jesus comes. In our brokenness, Jesus comes to us, and he wants this relationship with us. And Jesus offers life, and it's not, just seeing is believing, it's believing is seeing. And Jesus heals, and it's a sign that he has this power to give life. And John 10:10, it's I quote that all the time, and I don't know what version I quote, but it's the one I memorized in my head. John 10:10, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full, or have life abundantly. Another translation says, and there's this full life, this abundant life, this different way of living that we can have when we put our faith and our trust in Christ. Someone says insanity is doing the same things again and again and expecting different results. I'm sure we've all heard that saying. If not, I'll say it again. Expect a different result. But it's often the way we live. But we need to trust in Jesus, like the dad in this story. He trusts. He just goes on his way, right? He trusts that Jesus healed, that Jesus did the thing, and he finds out, hey, Jesus did heal at that very moment. And ultimately, God's way is better when we live like he calls us to live. And when we live this way, we'll see results. And now, it's hard sometimes, and we've been talking a lot about the Sermon on the Mount. That's in Matthew. Some of us read it. That was fun to watch in the Matthew challenge when people got to that chapter, because people are just like, some of the comments were, there's a lot to process in that chapter. I'm going to have to get back with you, because we were doing like a discussion online, because there's a lot in that. Anyone ever read the Sermon on the Mount? You're like, if you read Matthew, you did. It's that real thick red part in the beginning, because if you have a Bible they put Jesus' words in red, and it's important that they be read. But, it's hard stuff, right? Because forgiving people, that's hard stuff. It's easy to forgive somebody for maybe if they cut you off in traffic. It's harder when they deeply hurt you. And there's whether that stores a relationship, that's a bigger discussion to be had. But it's hard to love people sometimes. It's easy to love people who love us. It's easy to love lovable people, but sometimes we got to love people who, don't love us so well. And it's hard to be humble at times, especially when you're as great as I am. Little Muhammad Ali, for those of you who know it. It's hard sometimes to get rid of the anger and things we have. But when we live the way, check out the Sermon on the Mount, when we live the way Jesus calls us to live, we have more peace. Our life works better. We live life to the full. And we'll live the way we're called to live. It's often said actions speak louder than words. And one way to really live the gospel in our culture, to be countercultural, is just live the words of Jesus out. Now, there's I can't remember, someone said one time is preach the gospel continuously and if necessary use words. It's often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. We're pretty sure he didn't say it. But it's funny because I was at a conference one time and a friend of mine flipped out on that saying because he hated it. His point was you have to use words, you have to preach the gospel. And I believe that's true. And if you go on websites, they'll say the same thing. I do believe we have to verbalize our faith. But what the author of that quote, whoever it was trying to say is, again, preach the gospel continuously and if necessary use words, is your life should be shaped differently because of your faith. It's really it's kind of like a joke has a punchline at the end. You preach, but you word, anyway. If you don't get the saying, you don't get the saying. But our lives should be shaped differently because of following Jesus. You should be a different kind of employee because you follow Jesus. You should be a different kind of boss because you follow Jesus. I interact differently with my wife as a believer than I would have been as a non-believer. Now, it doesn't mean that before I was a believer, I was a horrible person. I did have some problems, trust me. Some of you knew me. But if I'm really following Jesus, I conform my life to the way he'd have me live. And so I forgive. I love. I work on humility. I get rid of anger. I do all these things. With our friends will be different. And the whole world will be different when we live the words of Jesus. And that's why ultimately our lives can be changed, and we'll see God transform people with his love, his grace.